Welcome to another episode of Losing the Relationship to Suicide. I am excited to share my conversation today with Sabrina Votava. Sabrina is the founder and president of Failsafe for Life in Spokane, Washington. Sabrina will share her story about losing her two brothers to suicide, and what you will see is her powerful story of turning her pain into purpose. Here we go. Hey, everybody, it's Tracy Ozer with Journey Through Grief. And today we have another episode of our series, Losing the Relationship to Suicide. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Sabrina Votava. I've known Sabrina for, I don't know, 6, 7 years now, probably. It's been a little bit. But Sabrina is the founder and executive director for an organization called Failsafe for Life in Spokane, and I'll have her or ask her to talk a little bit more about what they do. And then she's also a QPR master trainer. She's a trainer with Assist. She's a leadership. She's on the leadership team of the Prevent Suicide Spokane Coalition, and she's a licensed mental health counselor. And I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and we were talking about how we get into this work because something in our past has directed us to do that. So, I know your story, but our viewers don't know your story. Mm-hmm. So if you'd like to just tell a little bit about, why you started Failsafe for Life and who you lost, then we'll continue the conversation from there. But I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for asking me. It's great to see you and to get to chat with you. So, yes, I started in suicide prevention after the loss of two of my brothers to suicide 6 months apart in 2003. My brother Zach, both of them were older than me, and my brother Zach died in February of that year, and then Casey died in August of that year. So, um, I'd always had an interest in helping people. That had always kind of been on my heart about the career I wanted to go into. But as you said, for a lot of us, this really, that just shifted the entire course of my life and what I was going to do with my life, and really started my career in suicide prevention. And I worked in different capacities and volunteer roles and things like that throughout the years leading up to starting Failsafe, and then just really felt compelled because I wanted a local presence in suicide prevention in Spokane. And not to say that no one was doing suicide prevention, but I just had a little bit different spin on how I wanted to approach it. So we started Failsafe for Life, and it's been plug along ever since.
Well, I'm glad that the organization is there, as well as many other people in Spokane, Washington are glad. You guys are doing really great work. So, when you lost your brothers, how did you find out that this had happened?
Mm-hmm. So when Zach died, I was on my way. I was going to the University of Washington. Yeah, I was a freshman in college, and I was on my way to chemistry lab, which was always stressful for me. But that day, for some reason, I was early. I was really early, and I felt I was ready. And I was walking down from where I lived onto campus, and I got a couple blocks in, and I forgot my calculator. And I thought, oh, I'm really early today. I'll just turn around and go back and get it. And I walked back into my house and got up, grabbed my calculator. I turned around. I lived in a sorority at the time. And I turned around and came into the foyer, and my cousin walked in. And um, I was like, what are you doing here? I did, she was the family that I had in the area, and we walked into the room at the same time. It was really kind of bizarre. And we talked about later how she just showed up because my mom had found out and called her, and she had called the local police department to come and tell me. And my cousin was really concerned about how that would impact me. So um, was really kind of her to do that. Um, she she came into the room at the same time. She said, I had no idea how I was going to find you. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, it's a huge campus. She didn't know what class I was in, what my schedule was, anything like that.
Half an hour ago, she wouldn't have found you because you would have been in class,
Exactly,
not realizing
exactly.
you didn't have your calculator.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it was really, it was quite a moment, honestly, that all that came together the way that it did in that time. And I was so glad that she was the one to be able to tell me. And um, she said, honey, Zach died. And I said, what happened? And I remember like the amount of things that can flash through your brain in that moment is really kind of surprising, you know?
Mm.
And he had just gotten a new truck. And I thought, oh, did he crash his truck? He'd had heart troubles and he had a pacemaker. And I
Mm.
thought, oh, it was his heart. You know, those are the first things that I thought of. And she said, no, honey, he killed himself. And I was like, what? I mean, it's just, you know,
Doesn't
the
compute.
shift. Yeah, the shift between thinking something horrible happened to him, you know, that was outside of himself then, and that it was such a shift in my mind in that moment. Um, and I remember she had taken me outside before she told me. We were by the front door, and she said, I need to talk to you. And I got really worried and concerned. And then she had said, you know, that Zach had died, and I was devastated and crying. And then she told me that, and I was that he had died by suicide. And I was like, just kind of jammed my circuits. And I just remember crying, and she was gonna, I didn't know what to do because I was also in my head, this is how much it jars you. I was like, but I have to go to a chemistry lab because you can't miss them.
Right.
Like,
Right.
what is happening here? Um, and I felt really confused. And she said, I'm going to take you to the airport. And so I went to go pack a bag. And all I could remember thinking was that I needed to pack something nice. My brother Zach was very he was great at getting dressed up, and you know, we weren't very fancy people, but he could put it on. And so I thought I just really wanted to have something dressy and fancy for his service. And I'd had a few people that I ran into. I couldn't talk though. I just couldn't say it. I couldn't talk about it. And there was one gal that I lived with that I had known since childhood. And I ran into her and I told her what happened. And I said, can you please let other people know? Because I just couldn't keep saying it. You know, I couldn't even get the words out to anyone except for her. Um, and then I went with my cousin, and she took me to her house, and she arranged the flight for me. And it took me up to check me in. And she said, do you want her to go with you to the gate? And um, you know, that was, I know we still don't do that, but that was at a time too where it was like, you know, this is really dicey to try to go to the gate with someone. And I asked her, yes. She said, well, normally for a bereavement flight, we need some sort of documentation, but just looking at you, I can tell, you know, I'm going to help you out. I was like, thank you. Cause I just was like, you know, it's
Well,
so
and what
evident.
information are you going to pull, out of your
Right.
pocket that
Yeah,
moment?
exactly. I don't know, but I just, it was kind of, it was really vivid, but also really cloudy and kind of floaty. And I flew home, and then my brother Damien, my oldest brother, is still with us, picked me up from the airport and took me home. And I was home for about a week. And then I went back. I stayed home, and we had the service, and then I went back to school because I just didn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah,
Um, and and kind of powered through the rest of the quarter. And then I came home for spring break, and that's, I think, for me, when it really felt like it hit really hard. There was still a lot of flowers around, and my mom had put up a whole bunch of pictures of my brother everywhere. So the environment at my house had changed. And yeah, and then we spent some time, you know, thinking about, my parents encouraged all of us to seek counseling. We did some counseling together as a group, um, and made some agreements that if we were ever struggling with anything or having thoughts of wanting to end our lives, that we'd talk about it. And
mhm,
um, I think we had some fairly open communication afterwards, in an attempt to try to, you know, support one another, but also, you know, everybody's still really devastated and grieving. So,
sure,
and we all do it differently, as we know.
right.
So
So at the time then of Zach's funeral and everything, where's Casey at this point? Is he
he
there?
was he was there. He was there. He was with us. And his response to grief was, again, everybody's different, but his was so different. It was so different. We were all, I just remember kind of feeling like a shell, like I was floating, but also like things were surreal. And I was really low energy. I felt kind of like I was moving through peanut butter. And he was really high energy and very agitated. We were all sitting down for a family meeting and he was just pacing, um,
Mhm.
and kind of like, chewing on his fingers, and had such agitation.
Mhm.
And that really stood out to me. He also at the time, well, his job was to, he was a driver, and he had a few months after this death. So Zach died in February, and in May, Casey had failed a drug test, and so he had to go into rehab and inpatient care. And he was really resistant to that. He was not open. He didn't want to do it, but he knew that that was how he was going to keep his job.
Mhm.
So just, again, looking back, some evidence that he was really struggling to cope, and, coping in ways that weren't healthy or helpful. But
Right.
we also didn't know, there's so many things you just don't know about and you don't know what to do.
Right. Well, I
So
mean, as we're talking about uh, sibling relationships,
yeah,
Zach was Casey's sibling also. And
yes,
so, I would assume, obviously, it's probably not great, but I would assume that, that relationship, the loss of that relationship was devastating for him too.
absolutely.
So it sounds like maybe he was self-medicating because he wasn't coping so well.
Mhm.
Um, and so when um, Casey made the choice also to end his life,
Mhm.
were you back at school? I mean, were you
Mhm.
kind of the same scenario going on?
I wasn't, not yet. It was in early August, and I didn't go back to school until September. So yeah, it was the very beginning of August, and I was with the person I was dating at the time. We were just in the basement watching a show, and my brother Damien came down. And he said, "Come on, let's go." And I said, "Do I have to?" Because I was just feeling lazy. He goes, "Yep, we gotta go." And I was like, "Well, you just have this feeling, something's wrong." And he pulled me to the side and he said, "Casey died." And he said something like, just like Zach, or something like that. I don't actually remember.
Sure.
And I sprinted up the stairs. This is, just what our bodies do, and these weird, responses that we have.
Mhm.
That my instinct was to run away, and I just sprinted, and I got to the door, and I was like, "Where am I going?" And I just collapsed and was sobbing on the floor. Like, what
Yeah.
am I doing? I don't know, but you can't run away from this.
Right.
um,
Well, I would be like, I can't believe we're doing this again.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. And I remember too that I was crying, but I also felt really dissociated. And I wouldn't have used those terms at that time because I didn't know what was happening, but it felt so fake. It was like I couldn't, um, I was crying authentically, but it just felt even more surreal, and even more like part of my body was like, "You're supposed to be crying right now." And I was, because I was supposed to, but it felt like that. To process what had happened was like, what even, I can't.
Yeah.
And I told my boyfriend, he had to leave, and he was like, "What is going on?" I'm like, you got to get out of here. And I can't, you can't be here right now. Like, it's too
You gotta
much.
go. Yeah.
And he was so confused. And he, I I don't know how long it took him to kind of make his way out the door, but he was like, I was like, "You got to get out." And then he came back later with a friend, and he said, "I don't even know what happened." And I realized I had kicked him out without telling him, because it just, I was like, "Oh gosh, sorry." This is probably
I missed
not
that
really.
part. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it just again speaks to the situation where you're like, I'm just, at a complete loss. And really trying to stay connected with what's happening in my life, in the moment.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting with my brother and talking with him, and he was said, "I don't have any brothers left." Um,
Mm,
yeah, it just was like, yeah, so unbelievable, just really unbelievable. But I think, like you said, that loss seemed to impact Casey in a way that we didn't understand. Obviously, Zach and Casey were Casey was biologically my cousin, but we adopted him well before I was even born. So he's always my brother.
Yeah.
But him and Zach were 20 days apart in age. And so that's why I bring that up, is because they were so close in age. They had an interesting relationship. They were very opposite people, and very close in some ways, but also tussled and fought and butted heads like
Like normal
constantly.
brothers. Yeah.
Right. Right. So no lack of love there, but also, yeah, just, and probably amongst all the siblings, um, was the most kind of tumultuous, or where they butted the heads the most. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so obviously it's been a few years. Do
Mhm.
you find that, um, other people, you and I know people stop talking about people we've lost and we're ready to move on, and everybody else kind of already has long before we did.
Mhm.
Do you find that within your family and your circles that, um, I don't like to say forgotten, but just not as prevalent, in conversations and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think almost, a little over a year ago, a dear friend of mine, she was just a dear friend throughout school and knew my brother so well, went on family vacations with us and things like that. And she had said to me, "Do you still think about them?" And I was like, "Yeah, like every day." And she goes, and I just thought, of course I do. In my mind is what I'm thinking about, is that, of course I do. They're with me all the time.
I,
But I also realize, that, she said I do too. But maybe she didn't realize. I think that's why that came up, was like, is this normal for me to be thinking about them so much, because she really loved them too. So,
right. Well, and as I was talking to somebody else about, losing colleagues and, other relationship, um, we were talking about, well, these losses are in our face all the time because we work in the field.
yeah.
And so my question to them was, and I'll ask you too, well, actually, there's two questions, and I hadn't prepped you for these, so I apologize.
Okay. That's okay.
But do you feel that you have worked through your grief process easier because you work in this field, have to
Mhm.
talk about it all the time?
Mhm.
Do you think that that helped you process, whatever you hadn't already processed up
That's a
until
really
when you
good
started
question.
doing it? Um, I'll let you go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I actually think for me in the beginning, I dove pretty quickly into suicide prevention work. I would say really formally, I started about 5 years after the losses, but I tried to start in suicide prevention work 2 months after Casey died. And the person I reached out to, she said, "I don't know if you're ready, but I would love to meet with you." And then it came to the day to meet her, and I said, "You're right, I'm not ready. I can't do it." But
Yeah.
my whole, my studies, I was in the books about it. I wanted to, so to me, that was really the budding of my career, that I immediately started researching suicide. And I think that happened because it was too painful. So I
Hmm.
intellectualized it. I put it up in my brain,
Yeah.
because I needed to make sense of it, because that's where, where I've always gone in my
Hmm.
life to sort through things, is I have to think through it instead of feel my way through it, because it's too painful, to be in that.
Yeah.
And so I think in some ways diving into that career really allowed me to avoid some of the feelings and avoid some of the processing. And working primarily in prevention work, it doesn't, I definitely had to face my grief in a lot of ways, and also looking at other people's grief with them,
Hmm.
you know, kind of forced me into looking at my own grief. But I think somewhat different from what you do so intensely on a daily basis of looking at grief, that the prevention side, there can be some disconnect there.
Right.
So I think in some ways, I know it was incredibly helpful for me. I know it was the right thing for me. I know it's what I needed.
Hmm.
And I think in some ways, my grief was a little bit delayed by that and other circumstances. My mom, really was impacted by the loss, and um, she already had some alcohol use disorder, and it just really spiraled from that point. And so it just, that delayed my grieving as well. But I will say now later on, the skills that I've learned to help people with grief have helped me with my own grief for sure. So I think that's been really beneficial for
Right.
sure.
Right. Now, have you shared what happened to them with your kids, or, because your boys, they're both under 10, right? At this
They are, I
point,
have an 11-year-old now.
11
Yes.
now. Okay. We were just
Yes,
talking
yeah.
about how time flies. Yeah.
Yes, right, right. Yeah, yeah. They're
Now,
both,
obviously, they know about their uncles, you
they
know.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. They knew before they were 10, for sure. They knew as young kids. So I would tell them that you had two uncles and they died, and because of something that was happening in their brains. That's what I told them when they were very young.
Hmm.
And um, and then they just kind of took that. And then one day, my son started, he was about 9. My oldest started asking more questions
Hmm.
about what happened. And then I said, yeah, I was able to explain to him, well, they did something to that stopped them from being alive, but they did that because of something that was happening in their brain.
Hmm.
So we really, and I just tried to use as simple words as I could, but he fully understands it. And now at 11, he's familiar, understands when I use the term suicide. He's familiar with certainly not everything that happened, and he'll never, I don't feel inclined to ever tell him all of the details of what happened because I don't think that's helpful.
Right.
um, but if he has questions, I tell him, and I always tell them, if anything like that ever happens to you or your friends, mom can help, so let me know. I use it as kind of a way to lay the groundwork to open communication with both of my children. And my oldest he's always been inquisitive and knows, and he wants to know about it. My youngest is kind of like, okay, mom. And he's, dreaming about
Here she
Pokemon.
goes again. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, okay, whatever, not that he doesn't care that I lost someone. He's really tender to that loss, but he's also um, not as inquisitive about, you know, more of what happened or what it means or those kinds of things.
And to somebody yesterday, we were talking about, how kids are resilient and how they process grief differently than we do. And sometimes we talk to them assuming that they're processing grief the same way we do. At least, that's what I've seen.
Yeah.
And so my friend's concern was she was sad because she had lost her mom to suicide and her little kids. So her kids are like 4 and 5. And so they, are watching their mom sad and kind of moping around all day. And, she just, told them for that age range, just that grandma's no longer here and grandma passed away. And she made the comment of, I hope my kids never make the comment that, why aren't you over it?
Mm.
And I responded back to her and said, well, you are establishing, what goes on in your household, or establishing what behaviors, etc., are allowed, not allowed, whatever. So, you are showing them that you're going to be sad because their grandma's not here, but you're going to be happy that it's grandma's birthday, and you have pictures of her on the wall and you talk about her all the time. They're not going to think that that's abnormal because you have, put that culture into your home. Well, that made her feel, so much better that, they her kids will probably just think this is, normal forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, where it's so frustrating, as you know, that there's this concept that there should be a time limit to our grieving. Like what who decided that?
Right. All the people that don't want to talk to us about our grief.
Exactly.
All the people we put
Exactly.
on the spot.
Yeah.
Um, so you obviously went back to school, you got married, you've
Mhm.
had children, you've started a nonprofit. So how do you feel, what kind of changes? Well, I don't even know if changes is the right word. You have this sibling loss. How has that affected you? How's that affected, your life choices? Well, we know
Mhm.
you're doing a lot of work in the field, but outside of that, how are these two losses, and not having your brothers here
Mhm.
to talk to every day, bounce ideas off of, argue and fight with, whatever the case might be.
Mhm.
How
Mhm.
how has that affected you over time?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gosh, it's tremendous. As you know, it just completely fundamentally changes you to your
Hmm.
core. And the things that I think about consistently are, how much I wish I could share this with them. There was certain, movies that would come out or things that, and I'm just like, damn it, I wish you were here to see this. I want to share this with you. Or
Yeah.
just like you said, sometimes these questions that I have, or my brother Zach was a thinker, kind of like my oldest boy. And sometimes I want to go to him and be like, how do I parent this child? Like, what am I doing? And Casey was just such a really loving, caring, he was just such he would just be so generous and kind to me without me asking. And those kinds of things, I just miss those pieces in my life. I miss being able to, I don't know if they would have gotten married or had kids, but I miss the idea that that could have been, and that I don't get to have those things. It's been so special with my brother that's still with us to raise kids together and to talk about those things and to think about our childhood. That's one of the other things that's most frustrating, is because my oldest brother is 7 years older than me. So he remembers things a little differently than I do. And he'll remember something and I'll remember something. I'm like, we need some tiebreakers here. Where are boys? What the heck? That feels frustrating sometimes. I'm like, when my oldest brother was out of the house, I'm like, I don't have anybody to reminisce with about this. Do you remember that when we did that? Or um,
And they're like,
yeah,
no,
so
he's like,
those,
no, I don't remember that. Yeah.
right? I'm like, oh yeah, you weren't there. Oh darn it. It's those are the things that I truly I miss so much about that relationship. And that's, our siblings are the people that we have the longest relationship in the entirety of our lives. And I feel, we were so young when they died that it's, so much life happening since they've been gone, that feels like, gosh, you just missed so much.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all have different ways that we, work through our different loss relationships.
Mhm.
Um, and we don't necessarily understand each other's, even if we work in the field, even if, we've experienced it multiple times. Like, I can talk to somebody about child loss, and I can usually get on the same, page with them, right? And understand what they're saying. But like my son, he lost his sister. And
Mhm.
I've spent years trying to understand that dynamic of,
Mhm.
because they were 14 months apart. So, I know he struggled. I know he had substance issues, all of that. Um, but, I couldn't relate to it. On
Yeah,
some levels, I still can't relate to it,
sure.
which is unfortunate. So I think it's important that we share that these relationships are impacted, um, usually, in a very negative way because of this loss.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
sure. So, what's something that you would say to either one of them if they were still
Mm.
here?
Mm. Oh
Being that they're
yeah.
two distinct personalities, I'm sure it would probably not be the same thing for each
It
one of them.
wouldn't. I mean, gosh, I just wish we could like catch up. I would love to sit and have a coffee with them and talk about
Sure.
life. That's, everything that's happened. Um, it's been so many years and it's just still, you just miss them so much. Um, I had a moment the other day that my kiddo came out. I was thinking about the friend that you shared with about the grief, like how long it lasts. And yeah, it's lifelong, and my kids are well aware. But my dad had given my son my brother's collection of comics, and they were like meticulous. He was meticulous. He was so well organized, all of these things. And he brings out the box and it has his handwriting on it. And I saw that and I just started sobbing. And my son's like, what?
It's just
What's going
comic books,
on? What
Mom.
happened? Yeah, yeah, I just brought out some comic books and you lost it. Like, and I just, and then I explained it to him. I said, this is, this is what grief is like. You just have these moments where you're like, whoa, what is happening? And they're much fewer and further between, of course. But thinking about that, um, just how much I miss them. I think that's what I would want to say, because it never goes away. I never stop.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's really would be the biggest thing I would want them to know.
Well, Sabrina, I'm glad that you took the time to come on this episode and talk about, losing siblings and what that's meant to you and how you have processed that and taken it, to a level of helping others. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Because if we don't share these stories, some people are, just sitting in their own grief and thinking they're alone. And we certainly don't want that happening. So, please share this episode. Um, that's how we gain traffic out here in social media. Journey Through Grief, you can go to the website and find resources there. I have all of Sabrina's information, her links for Failsafe for Life, all of that will be in the show notes. And, certainly if you're struggling yourself, please call 988. It's our national suicide lifeline. And, people will be there that are able to talk to you. Even if you are just supporting someone who is struggling, you can still call that number as well and talk to someone. And it's always anonymous. Uh, so I know Sabrina does too. We both recommend that, you use 988 wherever possible when you're struggling. Again, thanks, Sabrina, and we will chat soon. And you have a great day.
Okay, thank you.